The massive lecture hall buzzed with the typical mix of excitement and nervous energy that accompanied Professor Zethkar's advanced xenobiology classes. Students from 17 different species filled the tiered seating, their various forms of note-taking devices creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and soft electronic chirps. At the center of it all stood Professor Zethkar, his forearms moving gracefully as he manipulated the holographic display floating above the lecture platform. Marcus Chin sat in the third row, his human eyes fixed on the swirling double helix that rotated slowly in the air before them. As one of only 12 humans enrolled at the Galactic University, he had grown accustomed to being a curiosity among his classmates. Most species had been exploring space for millennia, building vast civilizations, and contributing to the collective knowledge of the galaxy. Humans, by comparison, were newcomers who had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 decades ago. Today, we examine the genetic foundation that makes each species unique, Professor Zethkar announced, his translator perfectly rendering his thoughts into galactic standard. His reptilian features showed the wisdom of his 8 centuries of life, and his reputation as the foremost expert in comparative genetics was known throughout the sector. We will analyze samples from each major species group to understand how evolution shaped different worlds. The hologram shifted, displaying the elegant spiral structure of Zephyrian DNA, then morphed into the crystalline lattice pattern favored by the silicon-based Corthans. Each transition brought murmurs of appreciation from students seeing their own genetic heritage displayed in stunning detail. Marcus watched with fascination as species after species appeared in the display. The Aquarians with their fluid, adaptive genetic structure. The Vorthan with their incredibly efficient cellular organization. Each pattern told a story of millions of years of evolution, of adaptation to specific environments and challenges. And now, Professor Zethkar said, his voice carrying a note of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. We examine the most recently discovered sentient species, the humans of Earth. The hologram shifted again, and Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride as the human double helix appeared. It looked elegant in its simplicity, a testament to Earth's evolutionary journey. But, as the professor began highlighting different sections, Marcus noticed something unusual in his expression. Professor Zethkar's 4 hands moved with practiced precision, isolating different genetic segments and expanding them for detailed analysis. Human DNA consists of approximately 3 billion base pairs, he explained, organized into 23 chromosome pairs. Standard carbon-based evolutionary pattern, consistent with their planet's environment and development timeline. The display zoomed in further, showing individual gene sequences. Marcus recognized some of the basic structures from his preparatory reading, but the level of detail was far beyond anything he had studied before. However, Professor Zethkar continued, and his voice carried that strange note again. There is something remarkable about human genetic structure that sets it apart from every other known species. The hologram suddenly highlighted sections of the DNA in bright red, scattered throughout the entire genome like stars against a dark sky. Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued by the unusual marking pattern. Approximately 8% of human DNA consists of sequences that do not match any known evolutionary pattern, the professor announced. The lecture hall fell silent, the usual rustle and whisper of students suddenly absent. These sequences appear to be artificially inserted, showing clear signs of deliberate genetic engineering. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Around him, students from various species exchanged glances, their different forms of expression all conveying the same surprise. Genetic engineering of sentient species was not just taboo in galactic society. It was considered the ultimate violation of natural law. Professor, called out Thyra, a Zephyrian student whose species was known for their logical approach to science. Are you suggesting that humans are artificially created? Professor Zethkar's 4 eyes focused on different parts of the display simultaneously, an ability that had always impressed Marcus. Not created, precisely. The base human genetic structure shows clear evolutionary development consistent with their homeworld. However, someone or something has made significant modifications to their genome. Marcus raised his hand, his mind racing with questions. When Professor Zethkar acknowledged him, He stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze in the lecture hall. Professor, if 8% of our DNA is artificial, what does it do? What was it designed for? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the natural order itself. Professor Zethkar's expression grew troubled, his reptilian features showing an emotion Marcus had never seen before, uncertainty mixed with something that looked almost like fear. That, Mr. Chun, is precisely what troubles me, the professor replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The modified sequences are unlike anything in our databases. They appear to be dormant, as if waiting for some kind of activation trigger. And the complexity. He paused, manipulating the display to show increasingly intricate genetic structures. The engineering involved is beyond anything we have ever encountered. A Vorthan student, her insectoid features clicking with nervous energy, raised one of her 6 arms. Could this explain why humans adapted so quickly to space travel? Most species require centuries to develop the mental flexibility for interstellar civilization. Professor Zethkar nodded slowly. It could explain many things about human development. Their rapid technological advancement, their unusual adaptability to different environments, their remarkable ability to form alliances with species vastly different from themselves. He paused, studying Marcus with an intensity that made the young human uncomfortable. But it also raises questions that I am not certain we should be asking. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of questions? Who had the technology to perform such sophisticated genetic modification? When was it done? And, most importantly, Professor Zethkar's 4 arms gestured toward the holographic DNA, the red highlighted sections pulsing like a heartbeat. What? The lecture hall remained silent as the implications sank in. Marcus stared at the display, seeing his own genetic heritage in an entirely new light. Those red sections weren't just random modifications. They were purposeful, deliberate changes made by someone with technology far beyond current galactic capabilities. There's more, Professor Zethkar said quietly, and Marcus noticed his hands trembling slightly as he manipulated the display. These sequences show markers consistent with military-grade genetic optimization. Enhanced physical capabilities, improved cognitive processing, accelerated healing factors, all dormant, but present in the human genome. A collective gasp rose from the assembled students. Military genetic modification had been banned throughout the galaxy for over 2,000 years, ever since the gene wars had nearly destroyed 3 entire star systems. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. Are you saying humans were designed to be soldiers? Professor Zethkar's 4 eyes met Marcus's too, and, in that moment, the young human saw something that terrified him more than any answer could. The professor didn't know, and that uncertainty frightened one of the galaxy's most brilliant minds. I am saying, Mr. Chun, that your species may have been designed for something far more significant than simple military service. The scope of these modifications suggests preparation for challenges that would threaten not just one species, but possibly the entire galactic community. The hologram continued to rotate, those red sections pulsing with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Marcus found himself staring at them, wondering what secrets lay hidden in his own cells, what purpose some unknown civilization had intended for humanity. Professor, he said finally, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. How do we find out who did this to us? And why? Professor Zethkar was quiet for a long moment, his reptilian features thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would change everything. Mr. Chun, I believe that is exactly what we need to discover. But, I must warn you, the answers we find may not be the ones we want to hear. And, seeking them may put us all in considerable danger. The lecture hall remained frozen in silence as the implications of the discovery settled over everyone present. Marcus stared at the holographic representation of his own DNA, those mysterious red sections that held secrets spanning millennia. Whatever his ancestors had been designed for, whatever purpose lay dormant in his genetic code, he knew his life would never be the same. As the other students filed out of the lecture hall in hushed conversation, Marcus remained in his seat, his mind racing with questions that seemed to multiply faster than he could process them. Professor Zethkar approached, his 4 arms folded in a gesture Marcus had learned to recognize as deep contemplation. Mr. Chun, If you are serious about pursuing this investigation, I must tell you that it will not be a simple academic exercise. There are forces in the galaxy that prefer certain knowledge to remain buried. Marcus looked up at his professor, seeing not just the renowned scientist, but someone who genuinely cared about the truth, regardless of the consequences. Professor, with respect, I don't think I have a choice. If someone modified my species for a specific purpose, I need to know what that purpose is. Every human deserves to know what we really are. Professor Zethkar nodded slowly, his expression mixing admiration with concern. Very well, Mr. Chun. But we proceed carefully, and we tell no one else about our investigation until we understand more. There are those who would kill to keep such secrets buried. As Marcus gathered his belongings, his hands shaking slightly from the magnitude of what they had discovered, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something that would change not just his understanding of humanity, but the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The red sections in the hologram continued to pulse, like a heartbeat counting down to something momentous. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient mechanisms that had waited millennia for activation began to stir, responding to the first stirrings of awareness in their carefully crafted creation. Marcus Chin walked out of that lecture hall as a different person than he had entered. He was no longer just a human studying among aliens. He was a mystery walking among species who might not be prepared for what humanity was truly meant to become. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation in Professor Zethkar's lecture hall, and Marcus Chin found himself spending more time in the university's restricted archives than in his dormitory. The ancient halls of the Galactic University Library stretched for kilometers beneath the main campus, housing millions of years of accumulated knowledge from countless civilizations. Professor Zethkar had secured them access to the deepest levels of the archives, sections that required special clearance, and were monitored by advanced security systems. Their investigation had led them through layer after layer of galactic history, searching for any reference to genetic modification on the scale they had discovered in human DNA. Marcus, come look at this, Professor Zethkar called from across the reading chamber. His 4 arms were spread across multiple holographic displays, each showing different aspects of their research. The reptilian professor had been working tirelessly, driven by the same burning curiosity that kept Marcus awake most nights. Marcus approached the displays, his eyes scanning the complex data patterns. Over the past weeks, he had learned to read genetic sequences with increasing skill, guided by Professor Zethkar's patient instruction. What he saw now made his breath catch in his throat. These are genetic markers from the Vorthak Empire, Professor Zethkar explained, highlighting specific sequences. A civilization that disappeared approximately 50,000 years ago. Notice the similarity to the modification patterns in human DNA. Marcus leaned closer, studying the highlighted sections. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same sophisticated engineering techniques, the same complex layering of genetic instructions. They're identical in some sections. Not just similar, Marcus. Identical. These modifications were made using Vorthak technology. Professor Zethkar's voice carried a mixture of excitement and apprehension. But here is what troubles me. The Vorthak Empire fell long before humans evolved to sentience on Earth. The implications sent a chill through Marcus. Someone preserved their technology for tens of thousands of years, specifically to modify humanity. Or the Vorthak themselves survived their empire's collapse and have been hiding in the galaxy ever since, Professor Zethkar suggested grimly. Either possibility raises questions we may not want answered. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to their secure research chamber. Marcus looked up to see a figure standing beyond the energy barrier that sealed their workspace. The newcomer was unlike any species Marcus had encountered before, tall and ethereal, with features that seemed to shift subtly in the artificial light. Professor Zethkar's 4 arms moved quickly to close their displays, but it was too late. The stranger stepped through the energy barrier as if it didn't exist, a feat that should have been impossible given the advanced security protocols. Professor Zethkar, Mr. Chan. The stranger spoke, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested advanced vocal modifications. I am Coordinator Vexhara of the Galactic Council's Historical Preservation Department. I understand you have been conducting unauthorized research into classified genetic records. Marcus felt his heart racing, but Professor Zethkar stepped forward calmly. Coordinator, our research has been conducted within proper academic protocols. We have violated no regulations. Vexhara's shifting features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile, though on her alien face it looked predatory. Professor, you are examining genetic modification patterns that have been classified at the highest levels of galactic security. Your investigation ends now. On whose authority? Marcus demanded, surprising himself with his boldness. The weeks of research had changed him, made him more confident in challenging authority when the truth was at stake. On the authority of those who have maintained galactic peace for millennia, Vexhara replied, her harmonics taking on a threatening tone. Mr. Chun, you are meddling with forces beyond your understanding. Humanity's place in the galaxy is precisely where it should be. Professor Zethkar's forearms spread in a defensive posture. Coordinator, with respect, no one has the right to deny a species knowledge of their own origins. If humans have been genetically modified, they deserve to understand their true nature. Their true nature would terrify you, Professor, Vexhara said, her form seeming to grow more substantial and threatening. The modifications in human DNA were not made for benevolent purposes. They were created as a failsafe, a weapon of last resort against threats that have slumbered for 50,000 years. Marcus stepped forward, his fear transforming into determination. What threats? What was humanity designed to fight? Vexhara's shifting features focused on him with intensity that made his skin crawl. The very beings who created your species, Mr. Chun. The Vordhack did not simply disappear. They retreated to the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what they consider their rightful dominion over all sentient life. The research chamber fell silent except for the hum of electronic systems. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic history settling on his shoulders, generations of preparation and planning culminating in this moment of revelation. The genetic modifications in humanity are not just enhancements, Vexhara continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They are weapons systems designed to activate when the Vordhack return. Your species was created to be their destroyers, but also to be destroyed by the process. Professor Zethkar's reptilian features showed horror as the full implications became clear. You're saying humanity is a biological weapon? More precisely, humanity is a species-wide kamikaze attack designed by the last free Vordhack scientists before their empire consumed itself in civil war. They knew their dark cousins would return eventually, and they prepared the ultimate countermeasure. Marcus felt the research chamber spinning around him as the truth sank in. How many people know about this? Very few, Vexhara admitted. The Galactic Council has worked for millennia to maintain the balance of power that keeps the galaxy stable. Revealing the truth about humanity would destabilize everything we have built. But the Vordhack are returning, aren't they? Marcus asked, pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his mind. That's why you're here now? Why this conversation is happening? Vexhara's shifting form became more solid, more real, as if the weight of truth was forcing her to abandon whatever camouflage she normally maintained. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected movement in the void between galaxies. Something vast and ancient is stirring, heading toward our spiral arm. How long do we have? Professor Zethkar asked, his scientific mind already racing ahead to the implications. Our estimates suggest the Vordhack vanguard will reach the outer rim worlds within 10 standard years. Their main force will arrive perhaps 20 years after that. Marcus stared at the closed displays that contained the secrets of his genetic heritage. And you want humanity to remain ignorant until the activation triggers fire automatically? The activation process was designed to be involuntary precisely because the conscious mind would resist what must be done, Vexhara explained. When the Vordhack technology is detected in sufficient proximity, every human in the galaxy will undergo genetic cascade activation. You will become something beyond current human limitations, capable of fighting beings that casual star destroyers. And afterward, Marcus pressed, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Afterward, Mr. Chun, there may be no humanity left to celebrate victory. The modifications were designed for a single, decisive campaign against an enemy that considers mercy a weakness. Professor Zethkar moved to reactivate their displays, his four hands working with newfound urgency. Then, we need to find another way. If the original Vorthack scientists created this contingency plan, perhaps they also created alternatives. Professor, you don't understand, Vexhara warned. But her voice had lost some of its earlier authority. The forces we are discussing operate on cosmic scales. Individual choice becomes meaningless when the survival of all sentient life is at stake. Marcus looked at the genetic sequences now filling their displays again, those red sections that had started this entire investigation. Maybe individual choice is exactly what makes the difference. The Vorthack designed us to be weapons, but they made us human first. That has to count for something. Vexhara studied him with an expression that might have been admiration or possibly pity. Mr. Chun, your optimism is remarkable, but you cannot comprehend the scope of what approaches. The Vorthack Empire spanned multiple galaxies before its collapse. Their technology makes our most advanced systems look like primitive tools. Then, we'd better get started, Marcus said, turning back to the research displays. Professor, can we access deeper historical records? If the Vorthack Civil War was fought over the creation of humanity, there might be other documentation, other perspectives on what they intended. Professor Zethkar's four eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. The Nexus archives on Kepler Station have records that predate the Galactic Council itself, but accessing them would require. He paused, looking meaningfully at Vexhara. It would require someone with council authority to provide clearance, she finished. For a long moment, she stood silent, her shifting features cycling through expressions Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, she nodded slowly. Very well. But understand that once we begin this path, there will be no returning to ignorance. You will learn truths that may break your spirit. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Coordinator, I'd rather face the truth with my eyes open than face extinction in darkness. As Vexhara began the process of authorizing their access to the Nexus archives, Marcus felt a strange stirring deep in his cells, as if his genetic modifications were responding to the growing crisis. Somewhere in the cosmic void, ancient ships were moving toward their galaxy, carrying a darkness that had waited 50,000 years for revenge. But humanity would not face that darkness as unknowing weapons. They would face it as conscious beings, armed with knowledge and driven by choice. Whatever the Vorthack had intended humanity to become, Marcus was determined to find a better path. The investigation that had started with a simple question about DNA percentages had become a race against time itself, with the fate of all galactic civilization hanging in the balance. And at the center of it all was a young human who refused to accept that his species was doomed to be nothing more than a biological weapon in someone else's war. The Nexus archives stretched across an entire moon, their crystalline storage matrices containing the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that had risen and fallen before the current galactic order was even imagined. Marcus Chin stood before the central access terminal, his human hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to discover. Coordinator Vexhara had been true to her word, providing access codes that opened sealed archives that had remained untouched for millennia. Professor Zethkar worked beside him, his four arms operating multiple interfaces simultaneously as they dove deeper into the historical records than any researchers had gone before. Marcus, I'm finding references to something called the Guardian Protocol, Professor Zethkar announced, his reptilian features showing excitement mixed with apprehension. It appears to be connected to the human genetic modifications, but the context suggests it was more than just a weapon system. Marcus leaned over the display, studying the ancient Vorthack text as their translation systems worked to render it comprehensible. What he saw changed everything he thought he understood about his species' purpose. They didn't create us to destroy the Vorthack Empire, he breathed, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. They created us to save it. The archives revealed a story of a civilization torn apart by its own success. The Vorthack Empire had grown so vast and powerful that different factions within it had developed radically different views of how sentient life should be ordered. The dominant faction, known as the Dominion sect, believed in absolute control over all biological life. viewing other species as resources to be harvested and modified at will. But there had been others, Vortex scientists and philosophers who believed that diversity of life was the galaxy's greatest strength. These rebels, calling themselves the Guardians, had fought a desperate war against their own empire, knowing they would ultimately lose but determined to preserve something of value for the future. The Guardian Protocol wasn't designed to destroy the Vortex, Professor Zethkar explained as more records unfolded before them. It was designed to preserve the best aspects of Vortex civilization while eliminating their capacity for domination. The genetic modifications in humanity contain not just biological enhancements, but cultural and philosophical templates. Marcus felt a strange resonance in his mind as he read the ancient records, as if dormant memories were stirring to life. They put their own values into us. Their understanding of harmony between species, their knowledge of how to maintain galactic balance. More than that, Vexhara interjected, her shifting features now showing something approaching wonder. They encoded their entire civilization's accumulated wisdom into human DNA. When the activation occurs, humanity will not just gain physical capabilities. You will inherit 50,000 years of Vortex learning about governance, science, and peaceful coexistence. The implications were staggering. Marcus realized that the mysterious 8% of human DNA wasn't just military enhancement. It was a complete backup of an entire civilization's knowledge and culture waiting to be activated when the galaxy needed it most. But what about the returning Vortex? Marcus asked. If the Dominion sect is coming back, how does inheriting Guardian knowledge help us fight them? Professor Zethkar manipulated the displays to show tactical analyses that the Guardian Vortex had prepared before their defeat. The Dominion sect's strength lies in their ability to dominate and control other species through biological manipulation. But the Guardian knowledge includes countermeasures, ways to shield sentient beings from Dominion influence, and techniques for disrupting their control systems. We're not meant to destroy them through superior firepower, Marcus realized, understanding flooding through him. We're meant to liberate the species they've enslaved and turn their own empire against them. Vexhara nodded slowly, her form becoming more solid and defined as the full scope of the Guardian plan became clear. The returning Dominion fleet includes millions of enslaved species from other galaxies. If humanity can activate the liberation protocols encoded in your DNA, you could free entire populations that the Dominion believes are completely under their control. Marcus stared at the genetic sequences now displaying across multiple screens, seeing them in an entirely new light. The red sections that had first caught his attention in Professor Zethkar's classroom were not weapons of destruction. They were tools of liberation, designed to spread freedom throughout the galaxy. How do we activate the protocols? He asked, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. According to these records, the activation requires conscious choice, Professor Zethkar explained, highlighting specific genetic sequences. The Guardian Vortex learned from the Dominion's mistakes. They refused to create another system of involuntary control. The protocols will only activate when humans deliberately choose to accept their inheritance. Marcus felt something stirring deep within his cells, a resonance that seemed to respond to his growing understanding of his species' true purpose. What happens to us during activation? Do we stop being human? You become more human, Vexhara answered, her voice carrying harmonics of awe. The Guardian modifications don't replace human nature, they enhance it. Your capacity for empathy, your ability to see beyond tribal boundaries, your instinct to protect the innocent, these traits were specifically selected and amplified by the Guardian scientists. The archives continued to reveal the scope of the Guardian plan. Humanity had been seeded on Earth and allowed to develop naturally, with the genetic modifications remaining dormant until the species had proven itself capable of wisdom and restraint. The rapid development of human civilization, their quick adaptation to galactic society, their natural ability to form alliances with radically different species, all of it had been carefully orchestrated tests. We passed, Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. Earth's integration into galactic society, our peaceful contact with other species, our contribution to interstellar research and cooperation, we proved we were ready. And now the real test begins, Professor Zethkar said grimly. Long-range sensors confirm that the Dominion fleet has reached the outer rim. They're systematically enslaving every world they encounter, adding their populations to their forces. Marcus watched the tactical displays showing the advancing Dominion fleet, a dark tide sweeping across star systems and leaving enslaved worlds in its wake. How long before they reach the core worlds? 6 months, perhaps less if they continue to accelerate, Vexhara replied. The Galactic Council is mobilizing every available ship, but our conventional forces cannot match Dominion technology. They have had 50,000 years to perfect their control systems. Then, we need to begin the activation process, Marcus decided, though the thought terrified him. How many humans are there in the galaxy? Approximately 43 million, Professor Zethkar answered, spread across hundreds of worlds and space stations. But, Marcus, you must understand that not all of them will survive the activation. The genetic cascade is intensive. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility for his entire species. What's the survival rate? The Guardian records estimate that 60 to 70% of activated humans will survive the process, Vexhara said quietly. Those who do will possess capabilities that surpass any known species. But the cost? The cost of not activating is the enslavement of every sentient being in the galaxy, Marcus finished. That's not really a choice. He turned back to the displays, studying the activation sequences with new determination. How do we begin? Professor Zethkar's 4 arms moved across the interfaces, bringing up communication protocols that could reach every human settlement in the galaxy. The activation requires conscious acceptance from each individual. We will need to contact every human community and explain what they must choose. No, Marcus said firmly. That's not how this works. The Guardian Vorthack trusted us to make the right choice when the time came. I can feel it in my DNA. Professor, the protocols are responding to the approaching threat. Every human in the galaxy will sense the choice they need to make. As if responding to his words, Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his body, starting in his chest and flowing outward. Around the galaxy, he somehow knew 43 million humans were experiencing the same sensation. The genetic inheritance of the Guardian Vorthack awakening after millennia of patient waiting. The activation is beginning, Vexhara observed, her instruments detecting energy patterns unlike anything in their databases. Mr. Chun, what are you feeling? Marcus opened his eyes, and Professor Zethkar stepped back in shock. The young human's eyes now held depths that spoke of vast knowledge and ancient purpose. I'm feeling hope, Marcus said, his voice carrying new harmonics that resonated with power and wisdom. For the first time since this began, I'm feeling real hope. Across the galaxy, humans were making their choice. On Earth, on Mars, on the research stations scattered throughout human space, men and women were accepting their inheritance as guardians of freedom. The genetic cascades were beginning, transforming ordinary humans into something that could stand against the darkness approaching from beyond the galaxy. But they would not stand as conquerors or destroyers. They would stand as liberators, carrying within their very DNA the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had chosen to sacrifice itself rather than become tyrannical. The Guardian Vorthack had not created weapons of war. They had created champions of freedom, enhanced humans who could inspire others to break the chains of domination. As Marcus felt the full weight of his inherited knowledge settling into his consciousness, he understood the beautiful irony of the Guardian plan. The Dominion sect was returning to reclaim their empire, expecting to face primitive species with inferior technology. Instead, they would face their own greatest achievements, a free people armed with Guardian wisdom and driven by human determination to protect the innocent. The war for the galaxy's freedom was about to begin, and humanity was finally ready to fulfill their true purpose as the guardians of all sentient life. The 8% of alien DNA that had started as a mysterious anomaly had revealed itself as the greatest gift one civilization could give to another, the knowledge and power to remain free. Marcus Chun, no longer just a curious student, but now a guardian awakening to his full potential, looked out at the stars and knew that the darkness approaching would meet its match in the light of human courage enhanced by guardian wisdom. The galaxy would be free, not through conquest, but through the liberation of every enslaved soul in the Dominion's vast fleet. The teacher had revealed human DNA. A human had asked why 8% was alien, and now the galaxy would learn what it truly meant when humanity embraced their inheritance as the ultimate guardians of freedom.